In the 1950s, America seemed wrapped in a neat package of optimism, shiny chrome cars, suburban lawns freshly cut, televisions glowing in living rooms, and a promise that the war years were behind. But beneath the glamour, the daily rhythm of life carried traditions, tools, and customs that have now vanished, swallowed by time and change. To step back into the 1950s is to step into a world of rituals and objects that once defined a generation, yet today feel like relics. And through the eyes of Lady Margaret, a woman of grace, determination, and quiet endurance, we can walk the streets of that decade, peeking into kitchens, front porches, buses, and corner stores, and see what daily life once demanded. Lady Margaret was born black in the American South, a world where dignity had to be protected like a flame against strong winds. Her life was stitched from the same fabric as millions of others, a devotion to family, a deep respect for community, and an unyielding will to stand tall against discrimination. But her days, like all in the 1950s, were framed by tools, customs, and habits that would one day disappear. As we follow her, we encounter 20 things once essential in her life and in American culture at large now gone, forgotten or tucked away in attics. The first relic is the rotary telephone. For Lady Margaret, its heavy receiver and long spiral cord were lifelines, not luxuries. Each call required patience, each number dialed in a slow circle. She would wait for the clicking sound as the dial spun back, knowing that communication was never instant. Unlike the quick taps of modern cell phones, the rotary dial demanded presence. It forced people to think before they called. Margaret often placed her hand on that phone and thought of the relatives who lived miles away. Some still in rural towns, others searching for better lives in northern cities. That phone carried the sound of hope, but it also carried the silence of waiting. The second thing, now obsolete, the milkman's morning delivery. Each dawn, Margaret's neighborhood came alive with the quiet clink of glass bottles placed on porches. Fresh milk, cream, and sometimes eggs delivered with a reliability that was more than convenience. It was trust, a ritual of community. For black families, however, even these simple services often carried barriers. In some towns, milkmen did not deliver to certain neighborhoods, forcing families like Margaret's to walk further for basics. Yet, when that glass bottle arrived, cold and sweating with dew, it was a small reassurance that the day could begin. Third, the typewriter, the machine that sang with clacking keys. Margaret never owned one, but she watched her cousin, a young secretary, hammer words onto paper with speed and skill. Letters of protest, job applications, and church announcements all rolled through those inked ribbons. Today, typewriters rest as museum pieces, but in the 1950s they were instruments of survival. For those denied equal voices in society, the typewriter's print carried authority harder to ignore than handwriting, a weapon in a world of discrimination. Fourth, the jukebox. To step into a diner in the 1950s was to step into a temple of sound. Drop a coin, press a button, and voices like Ray Charles or Nat King Cole filled the air. Margaret loved the music. It was freedom bottled in song, but she knew that in many places, black musicians filled jukeboxes with hits they could not perform on the same stage as white singers. Even joy was shadowed by division. Yet still, the jukebox stood in every corner diner, glowing with neon, offering escape for a dime. Fifth, black and white television. Families gathered in living rooms, drawn close by the small glowing screen. Margaret's children sat cross-legged, watching shows that rarely reflected their lives but still carried the promise of something bigger. The television was a window, though a distorted one. The ads that flashed between programs promised modern kitchens, smiling white families, and endless prosperity. For Lady Margaret, those images stung. Her reality was tighter, harder, less forgiving. But the laughter of her children at a sitcom's joke was real, and in that laughter, dignity survived. Sixth, the daily ritual of ironing clothes. In the 1950s, a crisp shirt or a neatly pressed dress was not a choice. It was a requirement. Margaret's iron was heavy, the kind you heated until steam rose and hissed. She pressed collars with care, not only for appearance but for respect. In a world where black families were often judged harshly for the smallest imperfections, polished clothing was both armor and pride. The iron has given way to wrinkle-free fabrics and modern convenience, but in Margaret's hands it was a declaration of self-respect. 7th, the front porch. Today, houses are built with private decks or backyard patios, but in the 1950s, the porch was the heart of community life. Margaret sat on hers in the evenings, watching neighbors pass by, exchanging news and finding comfort in togetherness. The porch was more than wood and nails, it was a gathering place, a safe stage where voices mattered. For communities often excluded from wider American life, the porch was the parliament, the school, the sanctuary. 8th, the segregated water fountains, an ugly relic of that era. They stood in bus stations, parks, and department stores labeled colored and white. For Lady Margaret, these fountains were daily reminders that dignity had to be fought for in the smallest acts. To drink water should have been a simple gesture, but in the 1950s it was political. Those fountains are gone now, torn out with the passing of laws and the marching of feet, but their memory lingers as a wound and a warning. 9th, the drive-in theater. On summer nights, families piled into cars, paying by the vehicle, not by the seat. A giant screen rose against the night sky, and voices from a crackling speaker filled the air. Margaret's children begged for sodas and popcorn, but she also remembered that many drive-ins enforced seating sections separating black families. Still, the drive-in gave her children laughter and wonder, even if the car window framed it differently than others. 10th, the daily newspaper. Thick, smudging fingers with ink, it was the morning's first companion. Margaret read not only for news but for truth buried between lines. She searched for stories that rarely made headline stories of black soldiers returning from war, of neighborhoods demanding justice, of women like herself holding families together. Newspapers shaped opinions, yet often silenced the voices of those who most needed to be heard. Today, the crisp fold of a morning paper has been replaced by glowing screens, but in the 1950s, it was a lifeline of information. 11th, penny candy stores. Margaret's children saved nickels and dimes, running to the corner shop where rows of glass jars glistened with sweets. Licorice, gumdrops, and chocolate, tiny luxuries that made childhood lighter. For black children, such moments were treasured, even if the shopkeeper's smile was thinner than it should have been. Those candies are gone, replaced by supermarkets and vending machines, but the memory of sticky fingers and happy eyes remains sweet. 12th, Sunday hats. For Margaret, dressing for church was an act of dignity and defiance. Hats were more than fashion, they were crowns. In a time when respect was denied in public spaces, Sunday morning was the hour when black men and women shone, polished shoes tapping sidewalks, children in pressed clothes. The hat, wide-brimmed or feathered, declared, "I am worthy." Today, church attire has relaxed, but in the 1950s, the ritual of dressing with pride was a shield against a hostile world. By now, 12 of the 20 relics from Lady Margaret's 1950s life have passed before us, objects and rituals that once shaped her days, now vanished or transformed. Each tells not only of convenience or culture, but of struggle and dignity, of joy found in small places, and of justice that was still waiting to be claimed. The story of these obsolete things is not simply about nostalgia, it's about the weight they carried for those who lived under shadows yet never stopped seeking the light. 13th on the list of things now obsolete, the washboard. Long before machines hummed in every laundry room, Lady Margaret scrubbed clothes by hand. She bent over the basin, pushing fabric across the ridged surface, her arms aching but her spirit unbending. For her, clean clothes meant dignity, especially when her children walked into classrooms where judgments came swiftly. The washboard was not just a tool, it was a measure of love and sacrifice. Today, automatic machines do in minutes what once took hours. But in the 1950s, each shirt and dress bore the imprint of a mother's labor. 14th, the radio drama. Before televisions dominated every living room, voices on the radio created entire worlds. Margaret sat by the set, listening as actors painted pictures with sound alone. Crime stories, comedies, and love tales spilled from the speaker, filling her evenings after long days of work. For many black families, radio dramas carried stories that felt distant from their reality. Yet the imagination filled the gaps. Children huddled near, their eyes wide as voices of heroes and villains echoed. That era of audio-only storytelling has faded, replaced by screens and streaming, but in Margaret's time, it was magic for the mind. 15th, the family photo album. In the 1950s, every snapshot mattered. Cameras were rare, film was precious, and photographs were treasures locked into thick albums. Margaret turned those pages carefully, gazing at weddings, graduations, and Sunday gatherings, knowing that each captured moment was proof of life carried forward. For families denied equal representation in newspapers or television, these albums were more than keepsakes. They were history written in smiles and eyes. Today, digital images float endlessly across the internet, but back then, each photograph was sacred, passed from hand to hand with reverence. 16th, the etiquette of letter writing. Margaret's handwriting flowed across paper with grace, her words traveling through the postal system to reach cousins in distant towns. Letters were patient conversations, unfolding over weeks, filled with details of health, work, and dreams. The envelope, the stamp, the walk to the mailbox, all were rituals. For her, each letter was a bridge in a world that often cut people off from one another. Today's instant messages have erased that rhythm, but in the 1950s, the letter was not only communication, it was proof of care. 17th, the house call. Doctors once arrived at homes with a black leather bag, stepping through front doors to treat the sick where they lay. Lady Margaret remembered the local physician who came when her youngest child battled fever. There was comfort in knowing that care would arrive, even at night, even in a modest home. But access was unequal. Many black families were turned away or received lesser treatment in hospitals, leaving house calls as a fragile lifeline. Those visits have nearly vanished, replaced by clinics and schedules, but the memory of a knock at the door carrying hope lingers still. 18th, the soda fountain. Margaret's teenage daughter dreamed of sitting at the counter, sipping milkshakes with friends, but segregation often barred her from the stools. For white teenagers, it was a place of laughter and first dates. For black teenagers, it was a symbol of exclusion, though some found welcome in their own neighborhood diners. The soda fountain has disappeared almost everywhere, but in the 1950s, it was a stage of innocence and injustice, both bubbling in the same glass. 19th, the streetcar token. Cities once moved on steel rails, with passengers dropping metal tokens into collection boxes. Margaret clutched them tightly, knowing each token meant access to work, to church, to the market. But she also knew the sting of being told where she could and could not sit. Segregated transit was a daily humiliation, yet it was also a place of resistance where ordinary people demanded dignity. Today, tokens have been replaced by swipe cards and digital payments, but the echoes of that struggle still rumble like wheels on tracks. And finally, the 20th relic, the family dinner table as the unquestioned center of life. In the 1950s, meals were rituals of unity. Margaret's family gathered around a wooden table, plates set with care, grace spoken before eating. Conversation flowed, sometimes laughter, sometimes lessons. The table was where discipline met love, where children learned the manners, where stories passed from one generation to the next. Modern life scatters families to screens and schedules, but in Margaret's world, the dinner table was sacred ground. For families like hers, it was also a shield against a society that often sought to strip away worth. At that table, every voice mattered. With 20 vanished pieces of the 1950s now laid before us, the picture sharpens. It is not merely a list of obsolete items, it is a map of daily survival, joy, and quiet rebellion. The rotary phone, the Milkman, the typewriter, the jukebox, all of these shaped the rhythm of Margaret's days. Yet for black families in America, each object carried double weight: the ordinary function of life and the extraordinary demand for dignity in the face of discrimination. Lady Margaret's story reminds us that history is not only about grand events or famous names. It is about the texture of daily life, the objects touched, the rituals repeated, the struggles endured in silence. When we say these things are obsolete, we must remember that what truly disappears is not just the object, but the human experience tied to it. The washboard carried aching muscles, the front porch carried community, the segregated fountain carried humiliation, and the Sunday hat carried pride. Popular culture in the 1950s glowed brightly: television stars, rock and roll, shiny Cadillacs, and teenagers dancing in sock hops. Yet for Lady Margaret, popular culture was always filtered through barriers. Her children loved the music on the radio, yet knew some stations refused to play black artists. They laughed at TV comedies, yet rarely saw a face like theirs on the screen. They dreamed of soda fountains and drive-ins, yet learned early that access was not equal. Still, they claimed joy where they could, weaving their own culture, lifting their own voices, and refusing to be erased. The 1950s are often remembered as a golden age of simplicity and prosperity, but Margaret's life tells another truth. That golden age was not shared equally. Yet within her story shines resilience. Each obsolete object we've passed through was not just a tool of its time, but a mirror of struggle and strength. And though those objects have faded, the human dignity they carried, the quiet resistance they embodied, remains as powerful as ever. Today, when we hold a phone that fits in our palm, when milk comes from a supermarket shelf, when entertainment streams endlessly across screens, we are far from the 1950s. But if we listen closely, we can still hear the echo of a rotary dial spinning, the clink of a milk bottle on a porch, the crackle of a radio drama filling the night. More importantly, we can hear the heartbeat of Lady Margaret and millions, like her families, who held fast to their worth, who claimed joy amid barriers, and who taught us that history is not only remembered in laws and speeches, but in kitchens, porches, and dinner tables. And so 20 things from the 1950s have vanished. But the dignity, the struggle, and the courage that wrapped around them have not. Those remain eternal, whispering across time, reminding us that while objects may grow obsolete, the fight for justice and the beauty of daily life will never fade.